The South China Sea is one of the most disputed regions in the world, and as is the case with the Mogadishu-Nairobi maritime dispute, it's about the stretch of ocean contested by China, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. An international tribunal ruled that China has no historic rights to resources in the South China Sea. The freedom of navigation under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, examines excessive claims on maritime space. But on the silence of the concluded ICPD conference in Nairobi, President Uhuru Kenyatta and his Somali counterpart Mohamed Abdullahi Farmaajo assured that an ICJ outcome will not injure the neighborly relations between Kenya and Somalia. This comes even as Kenya said it prefers an out-of-court settlement, as was echoed at some point about a month ago by the CS Foreign Affairs, that is Dr. Ambassador Monica Juma. I'm coming to you, Mike, then. Yes. On that note. A lot was discussed, but the two gentlemen finally saw the need for the coming together of the two heads of state. The last time they met was in March 2019, after the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed tried to mediate between Kenyatta and Farmaajo, but that failed in a State House in Nairobi. Did they come to the realization that there was no need for middle-level bureaucracies and that the two heads of state can iron out the differences and see the light for the future relations between Mogadishu and Nairobi?
Yes and no. Eventually, the two guys, Farmaajo and President Kenyatta, hold the key to peaceful resolution of this matter. Let's not forget that in February this year, we actually expelled the Somali ambassador from here, even though the PS now is called Macharia Kamau.
Yes.
He tweeted very fast that we had not expelled him. We had just told him to go back for consultations. And we had also called ours for consultations. Why would you ask somebody to go back for consultation if his government has not called him to go back for consultations? The fact remains we kicked him out. And they realized later that that was not the right thing to do. This is just a dispute, a maritime dispute that can be resolved. Now, I want to talk about the speech that they gave on Thursday.
Yes.
I watched that speech and they said the ruling from the ICJ will not affect their relations. That was a very political statement. They knew they were insincere. The outcome of that court
will
hugely affect their relationship. That is how these things work.
In your predictions, it would go in favor of?
Let me give you the background, then you'll see where I'm heading.
Okay, then her guess will be as good as yours.
Yes, your guess will be as good as mine. Up to and including now, I do not understand why the AU has not been enjoined in this case as an interested party. Why? At independence, African countries agreed that they would maintain the colonial boundaries for peace to prevail. Otherwise, everybody else was going to claim somebody else's territory. We have very many of our ethnic groups that are overlapping in other countries.
Yes, the Maasais, the Luos,
the Maasais are in Tanzania, they are here. The Somalis are in a special case. You know, the Somalis are like the Kurds. The colonial fellow made sure that they were distributed. Some were left here, some were in Somalia, Djibouti. Some were in Ethiopia, and some are in Djibouti. Just like the Kurds. You know, they are in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, and Turkey, and Azerbaijan. So that is a special case. So the Somalia claim is very simple. They want the border to run diagonally. Kenya wants it to run parallel to the equator. The complication is, the reason why I wanted the AU to be enjoined in this matter is because if the order is given in favor of Somalia to run diagonally, it will affect the whole of Africa. Because then Kenya will also demand that the border with Tanzania should also run diagonally.
And then Tanzania
will demand the same from Mozambique. Mozambique will demand the same from South Africa. It will affect the whole continent. So the reason why I wanted the AU to be enjoined in this matter is so that they can bring in this special argument and make submissions on this matter and say, just a minute, this is the picture as it is. And we are giving you a perspective that these warring countries may not be able to address satisfactorily before you. We are coming before you as friends of this court to shed as much light as possible on the possible outcome of this matter.
All right.
So can you guess where I was driving at?
Yes, I can guess. Within this court, they say there's no appeal chamber, no lower chamber, no nothing. So no that room for, of course, amicus curiae and all that. And then the question then would be, when we're talking about the African Union, why does it have to go to that level of the ICJ when we're talking about constitutive measures to address issues of Africa? I mean, is African Union not well poised to offer proper arbitration when such issues arise?
It is. It is. Actually, the AU already have an issue on this matter. They have a stand that all matters in Africa should be resolved at the AU level before they go to the International Court of Justice. In fact, the entire membership of the UN has that agreement that issues between states should be resolved at the local level unless it is completely out of, unless they can't handle it. That's when it is supposed to be escalated to the United Nations level. We did not do that. We have the AU here, we have the East African Community here, we have the IGAD here. Somalia chose to go direct to the
Kenya had an option of consenting or not based on Article 35, but they still proceeded to agree to be taken there. Do you suppose then they had seen some level of fact that they would win? They had put all this into consideration?
You see, if you are sued and you fail to show up.
To show up, again, that's another.
Wow.
As much as maybe you can, you have that option of consent, yes.
And there is also equally the aspect of compulsory arbitration under Article 287 of the UNCLOS, that forms.
When did all this begin? In other words, who was the, who was the aggressor?
That was under an agreement in 2009. That was during the transitional government in Somalia and the Mkatinusu government. That when Moses Wetangula served as the Foreign Affairs Minister.
Yes.
Signed an agreement
between
the two foreign ministers,
which
the Somali parliament in 2014 relooked at.
Right.
And said...
And the agreement said what?
Well, the details are confidential.
Why should they be confidential? I'm just trying to look at the genesis of this problem. So Moses Wetangula signed an agreement on what? And Moses Wetangula's integrity has always been in question. It's not funny, Michael.
Yeah.
It's not funny. With a very serious issue with Tokyo.
The Tokyo embassy.
Yeah, with the
about
Tokyo
2 billion Kenya shillings.
Scandal, yeah.
It's
not funny at all. It's not funny at all. And so, sometimes when you have a problem, Ayub, the point I'm making is that you have to hark back and just try to see when the rain started beating you. Because this is a serious situation. You talk about the expulsion of an ambassador, tensions with a neighboring country. I think Farmaajo is really trying. But I'm just curious, where did this problem begin? And why should an agreement from 2010, you said?
2009.
2009. Is it not subject to the constitutional principles now, under Constitution 2010, which came in a year after, of two things, public participation and right to information? Article 35. Article 35. And the reason for that, by the way, on the back of allegations of the Tokyo embassy scandal, what if in that agreement, who knows what concessions were entered into in that agreement? I'm reading a book right now on Trump, several books that I'm looking at. And you remember the Helsinki meeting that was such a storm?
Yes.
So his entire
where
team...
he met Putin.
Yeah, exactly. His entire team, including Secretary of State, insisted, Mr. President, you cannot meet Putin alone. It was almost a fight. You can see how many of his staff have been fired or have resigned. Up to today, I'm told, all cabinet, support positions have not been filled, advisors, and what have you. And so it again raises the question of sincerity around integrity and what have you, because I just don't even see how there's a dispute how do you have a dispute in international court on Kenya's territorial waters? Or, for example, on Migingo? How do I have a dispute with Michael over his watch? So it's, we're also talking about waste of resources. Again, in countries, Somalia has really now come a long way. But I think for over 2 decades, Somalia hasn't had a government.
For 28 years.
Imagine, almost 3 decades. And so Somalia does not need to be embroiled in tussles with its neighbors, Somalia needs to be borrowing the expertise and support of its neighbors to stand up institutions quickly.
How then do we address this without,
You see,
ignoring the imperialist factor, the West factor, the hand of other people on this, or the bigger brothers on this?
I always ask, because I saw this discussion when they removed the AU ambassador the other day, and when they talk about the exploitation by France and what have you. I always ask, Linda, when all these things were being done to Africa, where was Africa? When you're being brainwashed, colonized, etc., where are you yourself?
Well,
you're also a person.
Well, that might explain again the outcome of the Berlin conference about 135 years ago, when Africa was there was a meeting to discuss for more than 104 days how to partition and divide Africa into sections.
And where were Africans? And so once again, the reason for that rationale and that argument is we want to move away from a political leadership style and governance style of excuses, where leaders just come and say, it was China. It was the British who did this. Where were you when you're signing the concessions? When you're signing away, your land? You must start to have real solid leaders who take decisions in the best interest of the people. So they say, and I've seen this discussion even online yesterday, the day before, on concessions. There's a lot of debate on the Mombasa Highway, for example, and the allegation that there's kickbacks expected
on the company, the U.S. company, American company.
Bechtel, exactly. And so we must have these discussions around what is in the best interest of our people, what is sustainable debt, what are sustainable projects, what are projects that will mean jobs, and what are projects that will mean aflatoxin. We must have those.
Fear of the unknown, fear of history repeating itself. When they look at, the fate of the likes of Sankara, Thomas Sankara, the likes of course, Anwar Sadat and all this, don't you think at some point it would trigger them to a point whereby they'll have to, abide by what the biggest see? It's
true. That's a good point, that very strong leaders like Steve Biko, etc., have always been taken out. But you see, leadership sometimes is not about just one individual per se. It's also about inspiring others and mentoring many other leaders. Okay. Because the fact is you cannot take everyone out.
Then Mike, I
wanted to say something about this.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Somali
I have a couple of my questions.
Yeah, because before you pose your question, Benji asked a question here and we did not answer him. The source of this problem. Personally, I think we can roughly guess where this thing started. This dispute was not so big until when Somalia got irritated that Kenya supported the election of Madobe in Jubaland.
Well, the suing was in 2014, way before even Farmaajo came to power.
Yes. But the escalation of this matter came now with when Kenya openly backed Madobe and Madobe was elected in Jubaland.
Because he's a Kenyan, isn't it?
Now you see. Now you see.
I've heard that.
So that explains part of the aggression. The second part of the aggression, we need to say it as it is that Farmaajo himself, actually Farmaajo is a nickname, he's called Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed Abdullahi. He's facing an election in 2021. And like all other presidents who face an election, you need to show that you are the macho man.
That you are working.
That you are working, that you can stand up for your people, your territory, you are the guy who can take up everybody and fight
I hate
them
that aspect of politics.
and crush
the
them.
cheap side.
So Farmaajo is also conscious that he needs to show the Somali nation that he's the guy who can protect them from these invaders called Kenya. So basically that's where we are headed. But again, there is something we need to address. As we are speaking now, that matter in the court, in the International Court of Justice, is in limbo because Kenya successfully lobbied to have it stood over until
it constituted
8th of June 2020, which will be a Monday. Why is that date important? That date is important because elections into the United Nations Security Council, where Kenya and Djibouti are fighting.
yeah.
They're not just vying,
it is
they are actually
some
fighting.
serious contest there.
That election is also coming up in June. I don't know if the date has been set, but June will be a very interesting month.
In 2020.
In 2020. And I know on 8th of June 2020, this matter will come up, and the first activity will be oral presentations. I don't want to say that Kenya will be looking for ways of dragging the matter so that the elections at the United Nations Security Council is finished first.
So then we come.
Then they can do what they want to do. That one I can leave for you to guess. But that is where we are,
Okay.
and that is where we are heading.
Yes,
Probably a
let me come to
strategic move,
Benji,
yes.
because there's equally the important aspect of the Foreign Affairs Ministry here, because there are some who have questioned the capacity, the lobbying capacity of the Foreign Affairs docket in the country, because at some point, the likes of Atwoli and the presidential delegation did point out that there was a mess standoff between Monica Juma and PS Macharia Kamau, because the president was literally snapped during the TICAD conference in Tokyo, Japan, in which Kenya hosted the same conference
TICAD,
2
the
years,
year before,
yes,
yeah.
2 years before. That was in 2016. Yes, in 2016, 17.
Should have been 16
And
then.
that, again, they said, explained perhaps the standoff in the ministry, the sort of the bad blood between the cabinet minister and her peers, and perhaps explained why we are very poor in our lobbying capacity, and the element of, again, a sort of not being up to speed with the diplomatic pressure that comes forth with Kenya being the blue-eyed boy in the region. Does that explain?
Can I give you the short
current
answer?
situation? Yes.
And it's interesting because I've been asked about this before on a live broadcast by Jeff Koinange when the current cabinet was being named after elections in early
In
2017. Yeah. So I'll specifically ask this question. My short answer, my short honest answer, Monica Juma is not really the right person.
Point a finger at, or right
And
person for the
you know,
docket.
It's really, 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 really sad how we are doing things in this country, because clearly there's a problem. She's more of a technocrat. You remember Monica Juma had a long-standing feud
With Amina.
With
not only with Amina, but even with members of parliament, where she was ejected out of Interior Ministry as
He
PS,
served as PS, yeah.
named by the president as secretary to the cabinet, held in abeyance for 6 months because parliament wouldn't approve, and then the president ultimately had to find her somewhere, which was she was then packed into foreign affairs. I know that it is our culture to gloss over issues. I know that all of these things are uncomfortable to talk about. I know we'd rather not talk about them. Her own husband is a good friend of mine.
Professor
Kagwanja.
Professor Kaganja. I know a lot of the backroom, or the background
Or the
discussions that went, because she was nominated by the president and couldn't sit in cabinet. That's a fact of life. As secretary to the cabinet, position held by Francis Kimeme before. And so she lacks the skill and the finesse to do the people side of policy. That's why the lobbying is weak. And so as we laugh here on set, let me reiterate what Ayub said. The president was snubbed in TICAD. If I'm his minister, I'm answerable to him. He's asking me, what happened? Where was I lacking? And we've had several of... Remember we had a big failure, I think that was under Amina. Was it at the AU?
AU Commission.
Where we were sure we've gotten it done. A lot of money was extended and expended
A lot
in
of
lobbying.
yeah.
And it failed flat. But all this is just amusing to some of us because, the truth is too bitter to swallow. I think that we need a better practitioner. Actually, my honest opinion, if you ask me, I think Macharia Njero, who's a former UN ambassador in New York, and I've met him personally.
That's Macharia Kamau.
Sorry,
Macharia
Macharia
Njero.
Which one was in New
Kamau
York?
is the current
Kamau is the
principal
current.
secretary.
But where was he before?
In New York.
Yeah, he was in New York.
Yeah.
I've met him. I think he would be better positioned to lobby and execute the functions at the CS level. And what I suspect is that because, to me, he seems so different from his boss, I suspect that there's a lot of tension and a lot of chaos there.
within.
But again, all this is, especially in foreign affairs where it's a diplomatic docket, I'm sure all this is concealed very, very. But knowing Kamau, knowing Monica is very good on the technical aspect.
The technocracy aspect.
So I would probably retain her as an advisor at advisory level, where I can take or not take her advice. But at PS level is execution. At CS level, you know, you're the face of the president.
Overall, yeah.
You see, at senior advisory level, you can either take or not take. But she is now pressed. I mean, look at how many blunders have been there, even on the issues of Kenyans held in South Sudan.
Yes, the Kenyans who were held in South Sudan, yeah.
And on many different, you know, Kenyans who end up in capitals and sports ministry hasn't paid, and they're unable to check out of a hotel, they're unable to get a flight or have food. You can see that Monica is hard-pressed on what to say, what to do, until she's pushed. So that's a lack of leadership. But we'd rather not talk about it.
Okay. All right, Mike, in 30 seconds, anything else that you'd want to say as we get to wind up the broadcast?
I can say very many things.
I know. But in 30 seconds, then.
What I think, let me talk about Djibouti and Kenya in June next year. Something happened in 2016. Netherlands and Italy could not agree.
Yes, briefly because of time.
And
So
eventually
they shared?
They shared 1 year each. Maybe that's what Djibouti is looking at.
Really?
Yes, 2 years, 1 year each.
But in 1960, Turkey and Poland made the UN General Assembly vote 50 times.
And they ended up sharing.
And they ended up sharing 1 year each. So maybe that's what we are heading towards.
Wow.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Of course, senior political analyst Benji Dolo seated right next
We've
to
already,
me.
we've
Yes,
already.
time is up,
Time flies.
of course.
Time flies.
Michael
Time is
Leo,
money.
public policy analyst.
Only one sentence.
Yes.
I'm looking at a lot of what the misunderstood KFCB is doing. I'm sure you guys are under that regulation, the Kenya Film Classification Board. But I'm just looking at the zeal of the leadership there, and just wondering if that zeal was expended across government.
The moral policeman.
Ezekiel,
The moral policeman.
Yes. Wow,
You know, in fact, I was talking about this vis-a-vis in the context of KEBS. Can you imagine bringing fake sugar or mercury in this country if Ezekiel Muto was there? Is that possible?
Remember, he's a man of God before he's everything else.
These are some of the things I think.
He would sit you down.
Integrity
with the
matters
Bible.
a lot to him.
Yeah, so I'm looking at that and trying to see
I
how we
interviewed him
can.
here. He said, I'm living in my house, the same house I lived in 10 years ago. And nothing has changed.
Nothing has
I'm just serving the public in my capacity.
Is that the definition of integrity?
No, not okay. Not in an extensive capacity, but equally was just giving an example of
It's just
how
a matter of time. We'll be, of
Yeah,
course,
exactly.
looking into his work, in what he's done. At that time when he's exiting the state, then we'll say, okay, moving forward, I think this is a figure we still need back in whatever capacity. Thank you so much once
Thanks for
again,
having us.
gentlemen.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Lovely
so
week
much.
ahead. Yeah.
Was this camel tea again?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I can tell by the taste, yeah.
Yes, you see my
Charcoal,
jacket.
chocolate brewed, very nice.
Sorry, he's not on our side.
I've had
My
3
name
cups.
is Linda Alela. Was doing this alongside Ayu, but of course, the gentleman right here. We have to say kwaheri. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you
you
so
very
much.
much.
Today you've not called him Sheikh?
I said...